Hi, my name's Kathleen Allen, and I'm the author of Leading from the Roots, nature-inspired leadership lessons for today's world. And today we're going to talk about biomimicry and nature's design and how we can apply this 3.8 billion years of research and development to our leadership and our organizations so we can create organizations that thrive 200, 300 years into the future.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I'm the founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes absolutely everything. So let me ask you, are you committed to up-leveling your leadership? As we stretch out into the not too distant future of machine learning and sitting at the feet of the AI gods, will we know how to stay in touch with why we are doing what we're doing and with the people, the humans within our organization? Well, stay tuned because you're about to find out. Remember, you can now chat about this episode or any past episodes on our Facebook page. Simply go and look for Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Podcast on Facebook. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. And we always need your help in staying relevant. So please get over to those places, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. You can also catch us on traditional radio stations every Monday and Thursday, all the way across the United States, all the way from Las Vegas to Philadelphia, from Philadelphia to Georgia, to Florida, to Colorado, to Wisconsin, to even Washington, D.C. and the Quantico area. You can find us everywhere. You can also look for us on Roku TV, where there's over 100,000 subscribers. And if you're a regular listener, a big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. You can also find us on Spotify, on Google Home, and Alexa by simply saying, play Dov Baron Podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down, dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, someone in the C-suite, sales leader, entrepreneur, or leader in any capacity, we are already looking at how to become more efficient in our organizations through AI and machine learning. But what's the potential cost to us, at not only at a corporate level, but at a human level? Will we know how to stay in touch with what we're doing, why we're doing what we're doing with the people in our organizations? And now let me ask you this. What if you had access to 8.3 billion, with a B, years of research that you could tap in to assist you being a better leader? You want to find out? Well, let's do that together. My guest on this episode is Dr. Kathleen Dr. Kathleen Allen. She is the author of Leadership from the Roots, nature-inspired leadership lessons for today's world. She is the president of Allen and Associates, a consulting firm that specializes in nature-based leadership, innovation, and organizational changes. She's worked with high-profile organizations, including McKnight Foundation and UC Berkeley, among others. That is, she is a member of the International Association of Leadership. Thank you for that. She writes on leadership and organizations in a way that describes a new paradigm of leadership that is based in lessons from nature, from living systems. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome Dr. Kathleen Allen. Good to have you here, Kathleen.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me on. I really appreciate it.
I am honored to have you on. I'm really looking forward to this. You and I had a pre-chat a long time ago. It was wonderful, and I know that our viewers are gonna get a lot out of this. But before we start, let's jump into a little off kilter. Talk to us about someone who's been a major influence in your life that we maybe likely wouldn't know. You know, it's somebody who really impacted you. Who would that be?
Well, intellectually, I think Margaret Wheatley would be one of the writers that I've followed for a lot of years and have really enjoyed the way she framed in her book Leadership and the New Science, how she framed looking at leadership differently and learning from another discipline, in this case, science. But I think if I were going to go more personal route, I probably would say my mom was a great teacher of leadership. She always kept the higher purpose of what she was doing. She was a volunteer, a mom, raised 6 kids, but her legacy, this is really what I now think the soul of leadership is the legacy that you leave for the future generations. And in her community, she left a legacy of parks, recreation, libraries, but not just tangible things that are still there today and still nourishing the next generation. So she just was
awesome.
That's a pretty awesome role model for me.
Yeah, that certainly sounds like that. That's amazing. That's fabulous. Now, in your book and even in your presentations, you've done a lot of research into what is known as biomimicry. And when you and I were talking about that, I thought this is so great. And
yeah.
You talked about leading from the roots. It's not about a quick fix. It's about making us think holistically about organizations through the lens of the most successful system there has ever been, which is nature, biomimicry. Tell to us a little bit about that, please.
Sometimes I find that I walk the bookstores and certain books kind of leap out at me and they draw me in. And Jeannie Benyus is the author of a book called Biomimicry, a nature-inspired innovation, I think, is the full title. And she, and I started reading that book and I just felt, boy, this is significant. And by that time, so this was in the early 2000s, and when I was reading it, and I was working deeply with organizations around helping them change their cultures to something that was more sustainable and that unleashed more participation and engagement and more innovation and more adaptation. And I looked at what she wrote and I thought, oh, this is my world. I work with people in people settings. And even though her work was looking at the lessons of design and nature, I found that all of those lessons that worked for nature also worked in human organizations. And that took me off. And biomimicry has generally been highly adapted into design and engineering work, architecture work. And now they're just slowly starting, let's say in the last 4 or 5 years, to look at biomimicry applied to human systems. But this has been something I've been doing for a long time in my career. And I just, it is so rewarding and so impactful for organizations when they shift from when they stop objectifying the people in the organization and start treating them as living human beings, and they treat the overall organization as living human beings, something significant happens. Change happens faster. It's a natural event. People show up, they bring their talents, their assets, their time, their attention, and everything goes better. Innovation ticks up, adaptation ticks up, all the things that we struggle with in our organizations today of, not changing fast enough, not getting people to authentically engage, all of that goes away. And what you're left with is a highly engaged, highly self-organized, purpose-driven organization where both people and the organization thrive.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So you've just described what happens when it's applied, but can you give us an example of applying biomimicry specifically and directly inside of an organization so that our viewer, our listener can go, okay, I could do that?
Yeah. So nature is designed on certain core principles, design principles, I call them, and living systems have their own dynamics that, and I kind of look at both of those, but here's a couple from biomimicry and nature's design. One is that nature depends on local expertise and self-organization. So there's no real CEO directing all action in nature. It's really designed on everybody, all species, plant life, trees, coral reefs, prairie flowers, whatever. They all are organizing themselves and taking initiative. And when I was working with an organization and we wanted to build out more distributive leadership, we used this principle of self-organization and said, how can we design the systems within the organization so that we unleash this self-organizing capacity that exists not only in nature, but in every single person that's working for us. So we changed the performance review. And in addition to evaluating people's capacity to do their work, we also evaluated people on whether they could initiate and organize their own work and their own learning. We evaluated them on their ability to be self-aware, so they would continue to get feedback that would help them evolve and grow. We evaluated them on their ability to align and actively contribute to the larger core mission and purpose of the organization, because you can't have self-organization without a direction.
Right.
And we asked questions around their emotional intelligence. Can they manage and are they aware, and can they manage their own emotions so they're not spreading drama and chaos throughout the organization?
Right.
So that would be a very simple way. And then we went back and into the job descriptions, and we went back to the supervision. And so we basically redesigned the whole HR system to complement, reward, and reinforce that we were serious about self-organization in this organization. And it was stunning. It worked. Then we also designed the way we did the performance reviews so it fit this self-organizing capacity. So we asked them to actually go out and talk to people about these 4 questions to get their feedback around their ability to align with mission, initiate and organize their own learning, manage their emotions, and be self-aware.
Right.
And so the process of filling out the performance review actually modeled the 4 things that were critical for us to demonstrate and support the self-organizing principle.
I mean, there's a lot of, and I will say this in quotations, a lot of talk about dismantling the hierarchy of power, flattening the organizational authority, those kinds of things. But the problem is, it is talk, and the reason I believe it's talk is because we have grown up in a hierarchical system. And what I mean by that is, as I've spoken about many times right here on this podcast, is that we do leadership the way we did leadership in the Roman Empire. Right. So it's not changed much. It's pretty ingrained. People like Rupert Sheldrake would say we've built a morphogenetic field around the whole idea of what leadership is. And we keep falling into the morphic field of what that is. So how do we break that field? Because it is so, quote unquote, knee jerk, so this is what, you know, I love the idea, but now I'm under stress, and under stress we regress. So I'm under stress and I go right back to being the authoritarian leader, even though I being whoever that is, there's a leader, might believe entirely in a decentralized organization, self leadership principles. How do we help them to break through that knee jerk, that morph?
Well, I find the people that are really first in line to break through and develop a new way of thinking about leadership and practicing leadership are the people who at some point are self-aware enough to know that the world is getting really complex. The disruptions are coming at us pretty fast and furious. And no matter how effective they are as an individual leader, they can't actually do it all. And so once a person goes there, then they seek out people like me, because that's really my whole consulting practice is built on people who have come to that conclusion and are ready to push the envelope to design a new system and to lead in a different way. Mm-hmm. And so it probably starts at some level with a self-awareness of what their capacities are, how big is their span of control, what is getting them into trouble over and over and over again. So here's another example of nature's design, is that nature curbs excess from within the system through the use of feedback. And in our organizations, leadership often is an excess that should be curbed, because if we are into high command and control, what happens is that we actually diminish the engagement and the talents and assets that the rest of our employees can offer the organization and help the organization. And you can often see pockets of dysfunction in an organization basically by tracking the richness and the openness to feedback. And if people aren't open to feedback, they basically are off on their own kind of journey of what they think leadership is, and they're not really listening to what is getting them into trouble. What is creating bad decisions in their organization? What's costing them more money to produce certain products than it needs to? So the idea of pushing the envelope is actually how I built my consulting practice. So then once you start pushing the envelope, there are kind of layers that you have to kind of go down if you want to shift your paradigm and your practice of leadership. Most of us spend time either trying to just react to situations. We're not really bringing a mindful noticing to our leadership practice. Then some go down to individual behavior, and we're trying to look at how do we predict and control individual behavior. Then we go down to another level, which is kind of program, strategy, process, structure. Can we shift those? And that tends to be a pretty strong kind of organizational shift. But the real deep change happens at the lowest level, which is really what are our deep background assumptions about how the world works, what's our worldview, what's our mindset.
Absolutely.
And when we can get down to that place, all of a sudden innovation and a really authentic shift happens in leadership. So in my coaching practice, that's where I work. I work on those defaults that are often unconscious, unintended, but are getting the individual leader in trouble. And if a person is actively looking for another way of being and another way of designing organizations, then this journey into what's holding them back from doing it can be a very powerful journey, and it changes just about everything. Right. Another example is, so one of our defaults, our kind of conventional practice is we don't see the interdependence in our system, and yet living systems in nature is fundamentally a network system, and it's driven on interdependence. So another example is that I've often taken leadership teams through an exercise where each leadership member on that team is asked to identify how each other person, all the other people sitting around that table, help or hinder them in their ability to get the work done. So the marketing person looks to the marketing and sales looks to service, or manufacturing, looks to R&D or whatever. And they do all of these paired up, and they just list, okay, how is finance helping me or hindering me? How is marketing or development or whatever? And it is stunning to me that they haven't really fully seen the whole network of why they depend on each other to accomplish the organization's goals. But this simple exercise can be very powerful at reminding people of how we are connected in our organizations and how our productivity really diminishes when we don't acknowledge the connection. But most again,
you bring up something so important for, I think, us to grasp in leadership. And at an egoic level, we are all separate and fighting for our own survival. And if we look into nature, yes, we've seen nature as survival of the fittest, the most violent, vicious. It's not true.
no,
And
it's not.
more is Darwin never actually even said that. Darwin never said it's the survival of the fittest. He said it's the survival of those who adapt the fastest.
Yes, the best fit.
Adaptation, which is what nature naturally does. And we look through an egoic lens at everything, including nature. It's the reason we don't understand our impact on the planet, is we're looking through an egoic lens. And so we see a tree and we cut down a tree. We don't understand that the root systems of all those trees are connected, and that there is an actual now science proving, and I'm sure I'm singing to the choir, but there's an intelligence at a root system that goes on across an entire forest, that an entire forest is impacted by you cutting down one tree, and that mushroom spores are part of the
mycelium
connection between all those. I mean, it's the synaptic connection of fungus to the living system, which we whatever, it's nothing. And we separate everything instead of stepping back and going, how is everything connected? And that's why I was so fascinated with our pre-conversation, was because I think that this is something that is vastly misunderstood. And part of it is in the separation piece of ego is also the separation of self, not only from others, but the separation of self from self. By that, I mean, there's this bullshit idea that there's my professional self and there's my personal self, and I will separate the two. Like, okay, Mr. Schizophrenia, that is not how it works. Because the bottom line,
our head is separate from our heart. As if our body, one body, all connected within one skin, actually has separate parts that aren't connected. It's really bizarre how this would be an example of this kind of deep mindset, this deeper way of thinking or believing that then shapes what you see. And then you act out of what you see or what you think you see or what you selectively see. And then you aren't open to listening deeply to the feedback from the system or from nature, and then using that to adapt. That's really how we thrive into the future, is by paying attention to what the messages are and trying not to use our emotions or our pre-existing beliefs to shape or curtail or dampen down those pieces of feedback for us.
But I imagine that even in the context of the subtitle of your book, that there's a good deal of misunderstanding about what it is you do. What is the most common misunderstanding about what it is you do? Is it that people think it's some kind of new agey, woo-woo, hug a tree kind of leadership? Is that what it is? Or is it something else altogether that I haven't considered?
Well, I think two things. One is, are you a part of nature or are you apart from nature? So if you think you're apart from nature, not a part of, then you don't know or believe that there are lessons in nature that actually could apply to you as a human being. And a lot of us carry around that notion that we're apart from, as instead of a part of, that we are And at some point, to get to regenerative design in our organizations, we have to reconcile and reintegrate humans and nature. So that would be one piece. The other is that just the kind of maybe the arrogance of consciousness and emotions. You know, there are many things that we are that apply from nature to us as human systems, but there are a couple of areas where humans are different, and one of them is that we carry consciousness. We have a brain, we think. Nature is run on instinct and information, but it doesn't have the same kind of consciousness that human beings have. And nature has some kinds of emotions, but it doesn't have the rich, deep variety, both functional and dysfunctional of emotions that human beings have. And so I think some folks would say that we would have to distinguish what areas of nature and lessons of nature would be most relevant, most helpful for our organizations. But I have found the lessons in consciousness and emotions actually has a fairly simple solution, which is how do we as leaders begin to develop the people that are in our organizations and build this kind of mindfulness to our consciousness, so we can go into our deep background assumptions. We can lift that up, and it's not just built individually, but it's literally built collectively in the organization. And then how do you build both individual emotional intelligence and collective emotional intelligence on your teams, your leadership team, and your organization? Honestly, I think I remember a stat from the US Labor Department. This was probably 15 years ago. And they said that when an organization is engaged, well, general productivity is around 4 to 5 hours out of an 8-hour day.
Yeah.
And when an organization is going through change, it drops to about 2 hours a day.
Right.
I mean, that's pretty stunning. But that's because we can't manage our emotions, and we don't have any collective emotional intelligence in our organizations to handle that. And so people are bringing their pain and their drama to the water cooler and talking about what might be happening or not happening. And if you can just build more emotional intelligence and consciousness and mindfulness, it changes literally your practice of leadership, and it changes the productivity of your organization and the results.
Now, that's interesting, because you and I speak about something very similar, but I believe from a slightly different angle. I speak about and work with companies and even individuals in eliciting their purpose, finding their purpose. But tell us, based on that 8.3 billion years of research.
Actually, it's 3.8 billion years of research.
3.8 billion, sorry. Dyslexic moment.
Yeah.
3.8 billion years of research. What do you believe is nature's purpose?
Oh, nature is designed to create conditions conducive to the life of future generations.
Say that again, because I think that's vitally important. The purpose of nature is?
Nature is designed to create conditions conducive to the life of future generations. It's a stunning, stunning purpose. If we just took that one thing from nature, that purpose, how would it fundamentally change the way we think about our business? Would we be choosing a different set of product? Would we source our products differently? Would we look at our employees differently? Would we look at our supply lines? Would we look at our customers if we thought our job was to create conditions conducive to the life in the future, the life of our organizations? I'm working with an organization now that has actively, for many years, seen a desire to be thriving 100 years from now. And it has changed the way the leadership culture in that organization has evolved. They believe that instead of this being a collection of egos and individuals jockeying for position, they see the leadership team as part of a leadership relay race. So they've taken the
Love it.
baton from previous generations of leaders of this
Yes.
organization, 75 years in the making, and they believe they have a stewardship for the organization so it is still thriving when they pass the baton to the next leadership team that comes in. I mean, think about that and how it fundamentally changes why they're in the room, what is their purpose as a team, and how do they make decisions in the present that will create better possibilities and platforms for the organization in the next leadership iteration. And then they in turn do the same thing for the one after that. It's just changing around purpose can be a simple, powerful shift.
We do work with multi-generational family business, and
you
so
get this.
often, well, actually, so often that's the downfall, because most of those businesses, family-based businesses, collapse by the third generation, and the reason is because it can probably get by on 3 generations of it's about me. I'm the boss. I'm the leader. You know, I'm the senior. Well, I'm the junior. Well, I'm and what it is that I don't give a crap about the next generation, and so it fades away. And when we look at what was the intent, not purpose, but the intent of starting the business initially, very often the simple intent was I want to make a better life for myself and for my family. That was the intent. And oftentimes the founder hasn't even considered purpose until a little bit later on, until it was more established. Then the second generation have already they don't know what the purpose was. They don't have the intent because they've already got a great lifestyle. And this is the problem. There's not thinking in multiple generations,
right,
other than maybe money, but not beyond that. And what you're talking about is a greater impact. And again, I love this analogy of nature because it allows us to consider business at the level of sustainability that's never been considered. We think about sustainability as in, well, we're going to use less power in our company. We're going to source our materials better. We're going to not use child labor. We're going to do, whatever it is. But when you think about it in a even beyond global way of thinking, because global even limits us to the physiological but materialistic, but at a greater level, we then have to think about, how does, we think, well, don't push crap into the ocean because we're poisoning the coral. But what we don't think about, well, what eats the coral? And we don't think about, well, I love, we were walking down the street the other day and I noticed a fish sign, like a painted fish by the manhole. And it doesn't mean there's fish down the manhole. It means when you pour crap down the manhole, that's going to reach fish eventually, and you're going to be eating the paint thinner you just poured down.
It all comes around. It all comes around.
That's what I don't think we get in leadership.
Yeah, I know.
Get that there's a ripple effect where where you are on the other side of that tide. It's going to come back to you anyway.
Because it's connected. It's an interdependent system, and eventually what you put out will come back. And I think I've done a lot of work in the leadership and sustainability world, but now I don't think sustainability is the final stage. I think if you think about degenerative practices, that's basically all of our conventional wisdom about leadership and management. It degenerates or degrades not just our environment, but our human capital, our capacity to create a better organization that will thrive in 100 years from now. It's all about extraction. But then you go up to green, and that's a little improvement. Then you get to sustainability. And sustainability I see as kind of a neutral place. It's do no harm. So you're basically not harming the next generation, but you're not restoring all the ways you diminished the environment and the people before you. So then you get to restore. So restorative practice is literally how well can you build resilience and design resilience into your organizational system so that it can absorb disruption and still maintain function. So I was at a community foundation out in California, and this county has had 4 major disasters: one human with a mass shooting, 2 fires, and a mudslide. And they are getting really good at restorative practice in their community. So that moves you forward. It doesn't just sustain, it moves you forward. And then the highest level is regenerative. What's regenerative design look like? And nature, with its 3.8 billion years of research and development, is designed as a regenerative system. It will literally regenerate itself. And we need, as businesses, as leaders, as organizational managers, we need to start looking at nature's design and living system mindsets and use those as the 2 core principles for how we design and lead our organizations, our communities, our educational systems, our nonprofits, all the way across, because that gets us to a regenerative world as opposed to a world that's degrading as we speak.
So, you know, what you just said there, I think is incredibly powerful, and I want people to get it. Like, you know, because you and I both know that people listen to podcasts in their car, in the background, whatever it is. And I think we've got to bring this, because what you just said is profound and vitally important, because I think that most, not all, but most people can get to the do no harm.
Mm-hmm.
Walk us through those steps again, which end, of course, in the regenerative. But what were each of the pieces, so we can go, okay, because what I want our viewers to do is to even write the words down and even go, which stage am I in? Which phase? If this is the evolution of us in leadership, if this is the evolution of us in business, if this is the evolution of us in humanity, where am I on that scale? Am I on the burn and devastate and use whatever the hell I like? Or am I at the top end? Like, walk us through, if you would, again, just so people can really grasp it.
So you start with kind of a degradation. And almost all of our prevailing conventional wisdom and practice about leadership and management and business is all embedded in that. It's extracting resources for private profit, but it diminishes the ecological, not just environmental, but the ecosystems. And that ecosystem could be your future business, or it could be an ecosystem of a community. You know, when we, anyway, so I won't go down that path, but so that's the extraction, degradation, degrading, literally. Then you go up and say, okay, let's be green, let's be a little better, and that helps. But then you go to sustainability, which is a do no harm. But now we have a huge kind of disruptive environment that we're living in because of the connectivity. The connectivity drives more and more wild cards, and it keeps throwing these things at us that disrupt. And we just had a week in the U.S. In the Oklahoma area where there was like 500 tornadoes touched down within a very short time span. And the weather pattern just kept hitting the communities. Well, this restoration, this ability to restore is gets you, if you're looking at a -100, that's the degrading. Sustainability is 0. Green is maybe -25. Restorative is like a +25. So basically you're taking the environment, or you can apply this to people too. You know, are we able to restore the people that have withdrawn from our organizations because they have passion, they have commitment, but they've been hurt by the processes that are part of our degradation, and so they've withdrawn their talents and time from our organizations? Can we restore that trust? Can we restore that relationship? Then the top one is like the plus 100 would be regenerative design. So can we literally build a system, an organization, a business that's designed to continually regenerate, adapt, evolve? So if we were going to look at profit in nature, nature would define profit as evolution of the whole system.
Wow, that's
Wow.
lovely. Say that again.
Nature would define profit as the evolution of the whole system. So what happens in nature is that as we have some disruption, it forces an adaptation. And those adaptations build more specialization in the ecosystem. And that ecosystem then with specialization becomes more diverse, and then it becomes more complex. It's kind of like a spiral.
Yeah.
And then after it gets more complex, you begin to realize as species that you don't, if you used to just harvest all of your own nutrients, that in this greater diversity, kind of like a food web, that one species waste can be your fuel, your nutrient.
Yep.
And so it begins to shift towards interdependence. And then you build these a predisposition to cooperate because you begin to see these reciprocal relationships that instead of extracting resources from the soil, which is what previous ecological stages do, they begin to exchange resources among the living species in an ecosystem, and then they start contributing it back to the soil. So that's where you begin to get to the generative design, and then that's where you get to emergence and new synergy, and then the whole system evolves and is more capable of being a resilient, thriving system and able to handle disruption without losing function.
See,
it's a stunning thing.
It is. I think if people could, I mean, I highly recommend that people do reach out to you. I'm going to make sure that they know how to do that. But if they could just grasp that piece that you just gave there on those 5 levels, and the self-reflection and the organizational reflection of these 5 levels, to say, you know, if we're really honest about this, you know, you might not believe in global warming, or you might believe in global warming, but you might think it's got nothing to do with mankind. You know, whatever you believe, that's fine. It's your stuff. But you can self-assess.
Yeah.
And, you know, the truth of the matter is we are either operating as egoic beings who are always looking after self. Fine, you want to do that, but there's a cost. Or operating at inside of a system, and we understand that we're part of that system, and it's not at the cost of the individual, because that's how the mind works. The mind says, oh, well, if I'm part of the collective, then I've lost the self.
Right.
You know, well, you kind of do in an intellectual sense, but you don't in the truth. You actually grow and you become bigger. So it's to actually give up the restrictions of being the thing.
Well, and why do we keep defaulting either or? You know, I used to work at a Benedictine college here in Minnesota, and their whole community, 1,500 years of finding a place, putting their roots down in a place, looking up to see what needs to happen in that place. When you look at how that community works, it's filled with these tensions of individual freedom and community, of conversation and core values. So you keep adapting and inventing with the current generation, but it's always within a framework of deep wisdom and core values of the community. So it's filled with these kind of creative tensions. It's kind of how I look at it. And I think if you wanted to take climate change right out of this and just say, okay, look at those stages and look at your organization and the talent that you have. I had a friend who was in banking, and he was stunned when he saw how much Amazon paid for Zappos shoes. And he was so struck by how the buyout figure was much higher than what he could track in terms of tangible assets. And so he decided to go visit them. And fundamentally, what he realized is that they're trading, the higher value is all embedded in culture. the culture of
Exactly.
innovation,
That's
and
what it
that's all driven by people.
is.
So
Absolutely.
if you're trying to build a company or sustain a company or grow a company around your that kind of additional gap that you're trading on, it's trading on your people. And if you objectify your people, they basically will understand that, okay, I'm an object in this organization, and therefore an object is ownable. So who owns this organization? And then they look to the leaders and they say, oh, well, you're getting the big paycheck, so you must own the organization. And when you come to me and say, would you please engage and help me solve this problem? They look around and they say, hey, I'm an object. You own the organization. This is your problem. Why should I show up?
Exactly.
And then that is really the thinking at the core around our engagement problem, is that we have leaders who may be objectifying the employees, and the employees know that, and so they don't engage because it's not their problem. Or you can have it in a flip side. You can have a leader who sees the livingness of the system, but the employees, through their experience and past experience,
Yeah.
think that they're objects instead of a human being, and then the employees are holding that objectification instead of the
Yeah.
leadership. And sometimes we can see it within leadership teams where
Absolutely.
some are working from a living system frame, and then some are looking at it more from an objectified frame. And those folks that hold the object, their teams suffer from it,
Of course.
but also they don't cooperate and literally um, work from an interdependent framework with their colleagues on the leadership team. And so you can have 5 divisions that are highly innovative and one division that is stuck in this kind of objectification frame. And that one division keeps literally jerking the interdependence of the system.
That brings me to something from your book that I think is befitting at this point, which is a couple of things you speak about in the book are organizational sunlight and photosynthesis of the organizations. So talk to us a little bit about that.
I love this frame for a number of reasons. One is nature starts with a generous act, and that generous act is a free resource. It's called sunlight and the energy of sunlight. But the less seen second generous act is that it requires active engagement in the form of photosynthesis to translate this free resource into something that sustains all life on this planet. So if sunlight falls on the moon, there's no green up there, no photosynthesis to turn it into something that fuels life. So it falls on literally barren soil. And I think in organization, so one is, what are our generous acts? I mean, the fact that this system is generous instead of self-serving is really stunning. And I think it's part of one of the reasons why it's a regenerative system. It continues to regenerate because there's this generosity and reciprocal relationships that keep evolving and building the system. But then the sunlight design piece caused me to start asking the question, well, do organizations have a version of sunlight, a free resource, energy resource in organizations, an asset that we aren't really tracking and don't really know or aren't really leveraging or unleashing? And I, after lots of reflection, eventually came to the place that I think it's human energy. That every Monday morning, our employees decide whether they're going to bring positive, negative, or neutral energy to their workspace. And when we, any change, any adaptation, any evolution, any high performance system actually requires energy. And we can throw money at it, we can throw supervision, we can throw structures and processes, but literally our free resource is human energy. And then I think leadership is our photosynthesis. And there are three kind of characteristics that I think unleash and change the polarity that people bring to their organizations. One of them is authenticity. So the more authentic our relationships are, the less self-serving or self-protective or fear-based. When that stuff goes away and we begin to have these more transparent, authentic relationships, it unleashes some of that positive energy. The second is a higher shared purpose. I write about this in the book. It's a very simple old story of interviewing three bricklayers, and you talk to the first bricklayer and you ask what are you doing? He says, I'm laying brick, right? You go to the second one, they said, I'm building a wall. And you go to the third one and you ask him, what are you doing? He's doing the same tasks as the other two, but he says, I'm building a cathedral. He saw the higher shared purpose, and he saw how his day-to-day work contributed to that higher purpose. And I think that higher purpose is what also invites and brings this positive energy into the workspace. And I think that a purpose, a higher shared purpose, is different from a mission or a vision, because a purpose actually is an articulation of how your organization connects to the larger environment that it's operating in. So our organizations are not siloed, just like the inside of our organizations aren't siloed. We are connected to the communities that we're doing business in. We're connected to the environment that we're gaining our resources from. And so a purpose is a statement of how how this connection is manifested. And I used to go into leadership teams and ask them to identify, what is the purpose of your leadership team? And people would be kind of stunned, but eventually they'd get to kind of a superficial statement of what it is. And so I stopped asking that question and I started asking, what is the deep need that your leadership team is here to respond to? And then that got us to a deeper level. Like, we're here to fiercely defend the future capacity of our organization, or we're here to contribute to the larger community. And oftentimes we lose, as our organizations grow, we lose the core reason why our organizations were put into place in the first place. But almost all organizations start with a deep need that they see, that they design an organization to fill. And the deep need isn't in themselves. The need is literally in the community that they are in relationship with, whether it's the global or not. And then the final
is always global. Some level. This is fascinating. We are already close to the end of the show, and obviously you and I can, could go for several more hours on this without any challenge whatsoever. It's a wonderful conversation, but we have to move into our lightning round. Are you ready for our lightning round?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, good. So in our lightning round, we ask questions that are maybe a little off topic, but maybe not. What are you presently most curious about?
This regenerative design. I'm deeply curious about how do I help change people's mindsets so that they can begin to see the possibility of redesigning the way they think about leadership in organizations and communities, so that we can deeply and quickly move in this direction.
Fabulous. In a time that we live in, which is a time where everybody's offended by anything and everything, what is your bravest opinion?
My bravest opinion?
That thing that might push a few buttons, but it's so true, and for you it's fundamental. It's your bravest opinion.
We have to bring our humanity back into our workplace. I think the ease in which we objectify people and identify who counts and who doesn't count in our society is appalling to me. And I I think at the root, that kind of separation that we experience and this shame, blame, and guilt game or pointing fingers game that we engage with, our political rhetoric is often founded on that. I think we have to shift the narrative, and the narrative has to shift from self-interest to come to interest that enhances or creates conditions conducive to the future. And that's
Couldn't agree more. That's fabulous. Thank you very much. You are asked to write a single question that everybody must answer. This is for life's final test. What is the question?
What is the legacy that you've left?
Can't be better than that, can it?
Mm.
What makes Kathleen cry?
Lots. A really sentimental TV ad can do it. But I think I tear up when I see authentic connection between people, and when I see people coming together for a higher purpose that will create something better for their kids, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren. I think that when we are connecting our future to the kids and the nephews, nieces, grandnephews, nieces that are part of our family system, we can see the future and the critical need that we have to shift the way we're thinking now, because it's going to impact them. And that's that relationship, that love that comes through a family system is very powerful. And it makes me cry when we see those kinds of beautiful dancing with the universe kinds of things that happen, that connect us to each other now, to the past, and to the future.
What makes Kathleen cry? Laughing.
I'm a horrible punster, and I love people who are really great at seeing the humor in everyday occurrences. I've got a really good friend who's just beautiful at that. He can't tell a joke worth anything, but he can lift up the irony or the subtle humor of ordinary time. And he does it with such succinctness and beauty that he can make me laugh until I cry.
That's fabulous. What is the most, I guess word would be difficult, but the most difficult inner demon you've had to battle? Because I think leadership is made of people who are courageous outside, but are also courageous inside. They're real leaders have faced their dragons and are, let me rephrase that, are facing their dragons on a daily basis.
Yeah. I think one inner dragon for me was I was always much better at giving than receiving. But distributive leadership, to truly unlock the magic of the system, you have to be vulnerable and you have to ask for help. And that was really tough for me. I kind of grew up in a time when I tended to be the only woman on the leadership team or in the director group. And that kind of carried lessons, and I felt that I needed to be all put together, which kind of goes to the second demon, which is perfectionism. But when you're striving to be perfect, always in control, and always in the giving direction instead of receiving help and mutual support, I had to be laid up for about 3 months to face that demon, to face the fear that if I needed help, nobody would be there. That was the fear. And when I needed help because I couldn't get around because I had a blood clot and some complications, I was stunned at the number of people who came over and weeded my garden and did food shopping and cooked for me. And it was a beautiful way to face and blow up that fear.
That's beautiful.
The community will support you if you let it. basically.
One of the things I've said to the leaders that I work with, because as you know, us leaders have a bit of an issue with control. And, one of the things I will say to them is, if you really want to find out how much control you have, give it away.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, and if you don't give it away, it will be taken away.
Wow.
And you'll
Yes.
find out. I know, because I landed on my head. You fall from a dizzy height and you get smashed to pieces, and suddenly you don't have any control, and you suddenly realize where you actually have control and where you actually need to give it the hell up, because it doesn't matter, because people will support you. And there's no real leadership without the reciprocity to receive as well as give. If you're a leader who only gives, whether you're giving your advice or your authority or whatever it is, you're a freaking control freak. You're not a leader. But in the reciprocity of receiving, you allow other people to lead. And that's what this collective that I love that you're talking about. So,
and that reciprocity is interesting, because that's the third thing that I think is photosynthesis in our organization: reciprocity, authenticity, and higher purpose. And when we have those three things going, we can unleash this human energy and turn it from a negative polarity to a positive, or from a neutral to a positive energy source in our organization.
It's a fabulous metaphor. As we're finishing up here, I just want you to ask you, please, you've shared so many absolute gems here. But again, as I said, I understand people listen to podcasts in cars and then they're doing other things. I always like to say, tell us something that our viewers, our listeners can do right now that's practical, that they can do it certainly within the next 24 hours or so. They could put into action to really begin to integrate this wonderful knowledge sharing that you've done with us today. What would that guidance be?
That's a beautiful question. I think one thing you could do would be to start noticing. You could take a walk in nature. You could sit on your front porch and watch trees, wind, water, and just notice how nature, what is happening in nature. When you think of a coffee cup, it's an object. It's ownable. I don't have to ask permission. It doesn't care about relationships. I can move it wherever I want. But when you go into a forest, it's moving all the time. If you want to learn about living systems, I would say take some time walking or sitting in nature. Sitting quietly in nature invites us to stay there long enough so that the natural rhythms of that forest ecology or prairie will come back, and the insects will start to buzz again, and the birds will start talking to each other, and just notice, and then ask the question, how can I bring this into my space, my organizational leadership space?
I think that is super simple, but extraordinarily profound. And I think that as it was said many, many years ago, that is simple but not easy. There's a distinction between the two. So you will not do this once, you will do this many times before you even notice. But once you commit to noticing it from a context of leadership, how is this, where I'm sitting right now, leadership? And is the trees the leader? Is the river the leader? Is the wind the leader? Is the sun the leader? Is the soil the leader? Am I the leader? Or is it the lion or the tiger or the wolf or whatever it might be? And you suddenly realize every one of them's the leader and none of them are the leader. And it's just a beautiful metaphor. Thank you so much, Kathleen. It has been an honor and a pleasure. Please tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find out more about you and all of your wonderful resources.
Well, you can, if you're really fascinated with nature's design and regenerative systems, you can read my book, Leading from the Roots, Nature-Inspired Leadership Lessons for Today's World. The Leading from the Roots is it's a roadmap for people who want to bring the nature's design and living systems leadership into their organizations. You can also check me out on my website, kathleenallen.net. I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter, but I would love to attract you into reading my blog. So you can go to my website, again, www.kathleenallen.net. And once a week, I send out a nice little nugget around something that we can learn from nature to kind of stimulate your thinking and keep you on focus around applying these ideas to your teams.
So as I said, we will definitely post all the links to that in the show notes. But again, it's www.kathleenallen.com, and I will spell
.net.
It. Sorry, .net.
Yeah.
And I will spell that for you. So KATHLENALLEN.
Yes, .net.
Okay, .net. So KathleenAllen.net. Please go over there, take a look. There's a ton of great resources. And again, we want to thank you, Kathleen. This was a pleasure and an honor, and I hope you'll stay with us to the end. And of course, you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode, the one you've been listening to or watching, or any past episodes by going to our Facebook page and chatting right there. Just simply look for Dov Baron Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. You find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or strategist for your organization. You can find me at fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or fullmontyleadership.com/speaking. The research consistently shows that the fastest growing companies face the challenges that you do. They're spending a fortune in money, in energy, in time, attracting, training, and developing their top talent, only have them leave at an alarming rate. If you're frustrated with investing all that time, money, energy, and effort, and having your people leave before you get your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, because you can't outsource authenticity. Also, remember to stop by the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. You don't need a www, just matrix like the movie, .fullmontyleadership.com, and get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool. It's a way for you to assess the 5 areas of leadership and see where your true strengths are. It's valued at $197. It's absolutely free to you. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how nature is your natural teacher of the highest possible level of leadership. I'm Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach the next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.